What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 133. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I have a lot of important news to cover today. Biden says the mission in Afghanistan is ending on August 31st, so I'll be breaking that down. In Haiti, the president was assassinated, so I'll catch up to the latest news on that. And I want to look at what's been happening in Iraq and Syria over the past week and a half since Biden's airstrikes in that country and how the situation has become less safe for U.S. troops. So, all that and more on today's show. Be sure to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show and the daily news roundup that I write. There you can find the full show notes page that has links to all the social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. It also has links to where you could donate to the show, which really does help me and Will out produce better content, upgrade our equipment. Maybe we could look at advertising or something like that in the future. And so if you want to help the show to grow, help the show to be successful, also this is what me and Will do, so help us out. You could donate to the show at Patreon or Subscribestar with the links you could find in the show notes page. And you could donate in crypto, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash wallet addresses are there as well. You can also support the show by getting your CBD products at Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde has high quality lab tested CBD products. You can actually see their lab tested results at the website palomaverdecbd.com. They have a great lineup of products: gummies, soft gels, extracts. I really like their topicals. It's why I usually talk about it on the show. Their sports cream is absolutely fantastic. I was using it every day, but they sent me actually a new sample of the Slav. And unlike the sports cream, it doesn't have a smell. I think actually, even with a little bit less, it goes a longer way. I like the sports cream a little bit more because I do like the menthol smell. But if you're a person that doesn't want to smell at all from a pain relief cream, then check out their Slavs. They're absolutely great. They work very well and for a long period of time. Really suggest all their great products at Paloma Verde CBD.com. Whatever you decide to buy, just be sure to use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. That'll get you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. All right, now let's get into the news. The first story I have is a police shooting in Phoenix. This happened about 6 months ago, but the full body camera has just recently come out and actually is a discrepancy with the original narrative. So I'll go ahead, anybody watching, you can see the body cam footage here as I'm talking about what's happening and explain it. Cop sees a young man, 17 years old, riding his bicycle down the street. That's Anthony Cano. Police officer Chase Beback Miller hops out of his car. The kid, after he sees he's getting pulled over, jumps the fence. By the way, the cop was pulling Cano over because his bicycle he was riding didn't have the proper lighting. After a short chase in a pretty well lit area for it being night, Cano grabs his gun and goes to put it on the ground. The police officer says put it on the ground. He throws the gun on the ground, and as he's falling away from the gun, the police officer shoots him in the back. Now, that first shot, there's some motion going on, but after he hits the ground, the police officer then shoots him a second time. And so this is pretty clearly a murder that anybody who's watching the show just watched unfold. Now, as is typical, people who watch the show know that this always happens, but it's one of the most cruel things to have to sit here and watch. So for 3 to 4 minutes before the backup arrives, the police officer trains his gun on this kid who already threw his gun on the ground. You can still see it in the video. It has to be 30, 40 feet from the two of them. And he's demanding the kid put his hands behind his back. Now, the kid is pleading that he can't do it. Why'd he shoot him? All this other stuff. And anyways, the police officers demand the kid put his hands behind his back so he could get medical treatment. But the kid, it looks like because the life is drained out of him, can't physically get his hands behind his back. And so he ends up on life support for a couple weeks in the hospital. Who knows that the police officer had actually looked to provide medical care for him immediately rather than just sitting there with his gun trained on this kid who's dying and bleeding out in front of him. Maybe maybe there's a chance he survived. I doubt it. I think the cop ended his life when he shot him those 2 times. But anyways, that's the situation you have here. If you're a resident of Phoenix, you should be happy to know that Officer B-Back Miller has cost the city $1 million. That's right. That was paid out to the family, which, they deserve restitution. Their son was murdered. That's absolutely horrible. But at the, same time, we need to be able to target the cops here in some way. Now, my understanding is from the family and the family's lawyer that there are no charges against the cop, and there's not a plan to at this time, but the family wants to fight about it. And so I think that is the good news, that the family is looking to push for charges, and hopefully we can make that happen. This article is at the Libertarian Institute for anybody who wants to check it out. It's got everything here, including the video of the murder. Now, a couple interesting other details that have surfaced recently on this story. The first is that there was a ride-along passenger in the car who was picked up, I think, a couple hours before the shooting happened. No clue on who the ride-along was. It's described as a civilian ride-along. Could be important information. It is also a report that the civilian exited the car during the foot chase, and no idea where the civilian is, if they're trying to help the police officer run the person down, or if they were just taking video from 100 yards or so away. And then the other one is that the officer, B-Back Miller, was shot 8 months prior in the leg. And so maybe there was like a PTSD situation going on there, where even, the cop should have been trained to keep his cool, to think rationally, understand that the kid has thrown his gun away and is no longer a threat, no reason to shoot him. And yet the cop does it anyways. Maybe that's because he was recently shot on the job. And so that, that's a part of the story to investigate and look at as well. Next police shooting we have here is in Arkansas, and I believe I mentioned this this shooting on the show in the past. It is 17-year-old Hunter Britton, who was an Arkansas resident. He was working on his truck, I believe with a cousin or a friend one night, and was like 3 a.m., took it on a test drive. Now, there are some divergent details here. I saw some information posted online from somebody who said they were a relative who disputes the police story here, who says that the young man, Mr. Britton, was pulled over. They say that the police officer just rolled up behind them in the driveway and didn't even put the lights on. But either way, what happens here is apparently he gets either pulled over, somehow a cop ends up behind him, and this is Sergeant Michael Davis, and he's unable to put his truck in park, which, if anybody has already been pulled over, this would be a real problem, because let's say he is in his driveway, it's on a slant, and so if he takes his foot off the brake, then the car is going to roll backwards towards the cop car. Knows that that's reason for the police to open fire on the car. And so he jumps out of the car, I guess, and tries to put a bottle of antifreeze behind one of his tires to try to stop the tire. In that short amount of time, the police officer hopped out of the car. Officer Michael Davis murdered him. Now, we don't know any other details or can't confirm what happened, whether the police officer pulled him over, lights on, or just rolled up behind him. And that's in part because the officer's body camera wasn't on. And so the officer has been fired for that, but Officer Davis is not yet facing charges for what seems to be a murder. And I think if it was any other citizen, they would be charged with murder. So it's time to do that to the police officer. Couple major funding programs that we need to talk about here, things coming out of the Pentagon. The first is the JEDI program, and I've discussed the corruption that's been huge in trying to decide who gets this massive Pentagon bid. And so what happened was the Pentagon, I think like back in 2016, offered a $10 billion or contract worth up to $10 billion for whoever could provide cloud services to the U.S. Now, as that happened, some of these companies started to buy up Pentagon contractors and people leaving the Pentagon, stuff like that. And at one point, there was somebody working for either Amazon or Microsoft, and at the same time was also or had signed a contract to in the future work for Amazon or Microsoft, but at that time was still working in the Pentagon, actually deciding who would get the contract. Anyways, other corruption issues was there are at least reports. There was a book that was written. No idea if it is true or not, but a book written during the Trump administration that the author of the book quotes Trump as saying that he's going to give the contract to Microsoft to quote unquote screw Amazon. I have no idea if that happened or actually played into the decision making, but Amazon put it in its court challenge to Microsoft getting this contract. So, anyways, I guess the Defense Department has finally thrown up its arms and said, "Screw it. We're done with this. We're withdrawing the Jedi contract, and we're now going to offer a contract worth about the same amount of money for the Joint Warfighter Cloud capability, which is just going to be the new Jedi project." They want to award the contract by April of 2022, so that's about 9 months from now. And the Pentagon says that at this time, only Amazon and Microsoft meet the department's requirements for building the cloud computer. But they say they note there's time in the next 3 months for other companies to be able to get to those standards. So it seems like this is going to be a joint giveaway to Microsoft and Amazon in the future here. It'll be a joint project between the two. But then, let's recognize that there are other companies looking, including Oracle, Alphabet, Inc., Google, and IBM. One of the interesting things that we have going on here is we have companies, that have a lot of influence over what people see online and what they're led to believe. Anybody who runs a website or sells a product knows that where you rank when people Google your product is extremely important to how much product you sell. If you're one of the top search results, you're gonna sell a lot more than somebody who ranks in 20th. And so they could have a lot of influence in order to get these billions of dollars of contracts, and there's a real corruption issue when you have these kind of companies that own so much, have so much control over the Discord in America, are also trying to get billions of dollars or trying to influence the Pentagon so they get those billions of dollars. It seems that they just kick the can down the road that they have with this Jedi project by changing it to the JWCC. All right, now let's get into the next one, which is the Air Force gives Raytheon a $2 billion contract to develop nuclear cruise missiles. This is after both Lockheed and Raytheon got $900 million contracts a few years ago to develop the prototypes. They end up going with the Raytheon model. Of course, it should be noted, as Dave DeCamp here does in his subtitle, that Raytheon is the former employer of the U.S. Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin, and so this is revolving door, Washington deep state swamp creature, absolutely run amok. They're looking for these long range standoff cruise missiles that are going to be able to carry nuclear weapons. They're going to look to fit them on the B-52s, the B-2s, and then the future B-21 bombers that are being developed by Boeing. The Pentagon wants a 1,500 minimum mile range, and they would like to start receiving these weapons in February of 2027. Again, this is going to cost us taxpayers $2 billion, and it is a part of the $1.2 trillion, at the very minimum, that's the number, nuclear upgrade the U.S. has going on over the next couple of decades. Now, another problem with this, of course, is, this is proliferating the nuclear problem, developing a new generation of weapons for nuclear warheads. And right now, the U.S. is still dealing with its past problems from its nuclear warheads. This most recent story from The Hill, the most Hannaford cleanup workers exposed to hazardous materials in Washington state. And so this is a report that was issued, and it found that 57% of the Department of Commerce, Hannaford Health Agency Workers Board. 57% of them say that they had reported being in an exposure event to these hazardous materials, with 32% of the workers saying they had been exposed to a long-term hazardous event. There are serious deficiencies in the healthcare for these workers. Not surprising when we know what's happened with burn pit victims or victims of Agent Orange from the Vietnam era as two prominent examples of when you work for the government, they expose you to dangerous and hazardous materials in order to not look bad that they polluted and destroyed the environment with all these hazardous materials. They're not going to provide you with extra medical care because that would be admitting that they did wrong. So that's going on. It's a real problem. But this isn't even the only problem at the Hannaford nuclear reserve. And they also have the underground tank where a lot of the nuclear, what they did at this site was they produced plutonium or processed plutonium for the nuclear warheads between 1944 and 1987. And they have a tank underneath where a lot of this material is held. And that tank is believed to be leaking. And so this is just another reason why we can't trust the government with nuclear weapons, is because they're going to kill us with the byproducts of those nuclear weapons, and I'm sure are causing increased cancer to the people who work there and the people who live in the surrounding area. Although I guess, you would have to actually be able to do some medical science. That's often hard to prove with cancer and everything like that, but it would seem to make sense that people exposed to these nuclear kind of events, and if this tank is leaking, people who are exposed to that kind of nuclear radiation fallout material is pretty nasty. All right, now let's talk about the Pentagon's warning about nuclear war. And this is a recent report where they say that, remember, this is a Pentagon report, so I'll get into where it's their propaganda. Despite concerted U.S. efforts to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in international affairs and to negotiate reductions in the number of nuclear weapons since 2010, no potential adversary has reduced either the role of their nuclear weapons in its national security strategy or the number of nuclear weapons it fields. Rather, they have moved decidedly in the opposite direction. As a result, there is an increased potential for regional conflicts involving nuclear armed adversaries in several parts of the world and potential for an adversary nuclear escalation and crisis or conflict. Now, the biggest perpetrator of what the Pentagon alleges in this statement is definitely the United States. We've developed low-yield nuclear weapons. We haven't, complied with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, nor moved in any way to reduce its nuclear weapons. When Russia wanted to extend New START Treaty, the U.S. drug its feet until the very last minute. It's withdrawn from the Open Skies Treaty, the INF Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. It has, threatened nuclear weapons against several countries. It's acted more provocatively towards China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and certainly hasn't done anything to really stabilize nuclear tensions between other countries like India and Pakistan. And so that, while the U.S. makes this statement, it's absolutely true that the other countries are guilty of this as well. The biggest perpetrator and the reason, the momentum for a lot of the increased risk of nuclear conflict around the world is because of the U.S., because of the Pentagon. Another very curious story from the Pentagon, and this is from the Army Times. Prepare for mandatory COVID vaccinations in September, Army tells commands. And so there's one very interesting, I guess, two really big things about this story. The first is, of course, if the Army is going to mandate all of the enlisted men get vaccines, that's a pretty big decision, and I think there's going to be an awful lot of opposition to it. Several months ago, when the vaccine first came out, one of the main groups that ranked high for hesitancy yet had early access to the vaccine was the military, and so I wouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of resistance to this. Congressman Thomas Massey quickly tweeted out that he had heard from enlisted men that they didn't want this and that would cause them to leave the army, and so there are reasons that this could get walked back just because the men are saying no, the men and women are saying no, and if you force us, we're going to leave. The other thing that notes is that it will do this if the FDA gives the COVID vaccines licensure by September 1st. And so I guess, if they, get the vaccine with approval, let's say in October, November, then the Army will make it mandatory at that point. But I guess September at the earliest, if it gets approval. I just wonder if maybe this is some kind of tell that the vaccine is going to get approval around September 1st, that the military is planning that, especially since this seems like it's a directive that came from the White House. I would think the White House would have advanced knowledge of exactly when the COVID vaccines are likely to get approval from the FDA. Now, the other thing is, let's just say only the Moderna, only the Pfizer, I doubt would be the Johnson & Johnson, gets approved. I'm curious if the soldiers will be required to take the only vaccine if it's only one that's approved, and that would certainly seem to give some other hesitancy, not even having the freedom of choice to pick among the vaccines. So that's all very interesting coming out of the military. Now let's look at what's happening in Haiti, where the president was assassinated. Jovenel Moise, I'm just going to call him Morse, was assassinated in his home, I believe 2 days ago. I think it was the 6th, the night of the 6th, maybe the morning of the 7th, that the killing actually took place. So now the narrative that we have so far from this is coming from authorities in Haiti. And so I don't understand all the politics there exactly, maybe where the police bias is, where their loyalties may lie. It's always possible when a president's assassinated that some portion of the police force was involved. And so, not that there's any indication on that here, but just to say that, this is a narrative from a source who we don't really understand the motives of. And what they are saying is that armed men showed up to the home of the president in the middle of the night. At least one of the people spoke English with an American accent, but possibly more, and was at least posing as a DEA agent, identified themselves as DEA, and that's apparently how they got access, at least some access, to the president. I'm not sure if a shootout ensued at the presidential compound, if they just walked into his bed in the middle of the night and fired a bunch of rounds. His wife was severely injured. The president's wife was severely injured and is receiving now treatment in Miami and Florida. I'm not sure what the likelihood that she is going to make it is. At least the initial reporting seemed that she was in fairly critical condition. So that's about the narrative that we have around the assassination as it is so far. After that, we found out, I believe it would have been last night, so the night of the 7th, there was some kind of shootout conflict between the police and the alleged coup plotters. The police report, I believe, 4 of the coup, or not coup plotters, the assassination team, 4 of them are dead, and that 3 hostages that were taken, people who were taken hostage at the presidential compound, were recovered, and then 2 of the assassins were arrested, and then 2 more are still missing. Now, I guess it's unclear to me exactly if all these people were actually involved in the assassination, if some of them, only got involved later, weren't aware, what everybody's role is. There's still a lot of mystery and questions to talk about here, but that is, again, the narrative being put forward by the authorities in Haiti. So now when we look to why the president may have been assassinated, again, this is all speculation, but there has been turmoil, protesting, chaos in the streets of Haiti for, I think, most of 2021. Although I'm not sure, if any of that really has to do with COVID. I think it's a country that has fared fairly well through the COVID outbreak. Maybe it's because of its location, it's an island. Maybe it's several reasons, or it could be that it really hasn't fared that well. It's just a situation of they're not really testing or something. Anyways, and not sure what the cause for all the political strife was, all the protesting in the streets, but some of it was due to the president, Moshe, overstaying his term. Now, there's a dispute here because the controversy surrounding this in Haiti was, I guess, after he was elected in, I believe, 2017, there was political strife and instability that the president argues prevented him from doing his job. So his term shouldn't have started until like a year or two later. And now he claims that his term should run out, I believe, in February of 2022. Now, he has been supported by the United States through the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration continued with that policy. We heard State Department spokesperson Ned Price at a press briefing saying that a new president should be elected of Haiti when Morse's term ends on February 7th, 2022. And so this could be the cause the president overstays his welcome, claims to keep being president. Some outraged citizens decide, what, we're going to just put an end to this. Again, it does seem interesting that he does have backing from the United States, at least up until this point. Of course, he doesn't have any now, but before he did. And then there was also this constitutional referendum that he was pushing in Haiti. And I think part of the issue there was that it was going to give the president, which was his role, a lot more power, including replacing the prime minister with a vice president that would be appointed by the president, and then give the president some control over different ministries, and essentially just taking the Haitian constitution and changing it in a way that gives the president a lot more power. So maybe it was that power grab that the assassins were concerned about that caused them to act. A lot of questions still. The State Department, of course, denied that the DEA was involved in any way. I think it would be quite brazen for a DEA agent to go identify himself as DEA, and then go in and assassinate the president. But crazy things happen. So there's a lot of questions here still, but this is I think going to be a big story, and it is a potential place where the U.S. can intervene. Daniel Larison has a great piece on his Substack today titled "Do Not Intervene in Haiti," and he just breaks down that the U.S. has been involved here in the past. Ted Snyder does this in his article at antiwar.com. That was out on the 8th of July, so it's a day old now. If you go and look at the viewpoints, you can find it pretty easily, or he should be in the columnist section on the right hand margin of the page. You can find his most recent piece. But here, both Larison and Snyder lay out the past U.S. involvement in Haiti and why we shouldn't get back involved, and then particularly Daniel Larison points out an article in the Washington Post which calls for a UN-led intervention, which I think he rightly points out no doubt would mean the U.S. getting involved. Now, I think he makes another good point, which is that even if the U.S. could do something, even let's say you had a crystal ball and you knew that this wouldn't fall and end up a situation like in Afghanistan. We try a nation building effort, we put our troops there, it completely falls apart. Well, the U.S. has to stop thinking they could do this. And even if you think that you could get that outcome, it doesn't matter, because every time we try it, it pretty much fails. And we should give up on trying this nation building stuff and getting involved. Elsewhere in Latin America, Biden has reaffirmed his support for Venezuela's self-proclaimed president Juan Guaido, this guy has no power in the country. He wasn't even well known in the country, at like 3% recognition when he was elected, just a little bit more when he declared himself president. He doesn't even have full back and supporting of the Venezuelan opposition, but he does have the supporting first of the, kind of neocon creatures that weave their way into the Trump administration, like Elliot Abrams, and now continuing into the Biden administration, where, he calls for, Guaido to lead his people to freedom, democracy, and sovereignty. So that's the U.S. position on Venezuela. Unfortunately, you elect a new president. He says he's nothing like his predecessor. Unfortunately, Biden just keeps adopting Trump's policies. A couple war games I wanted to update really quick. Sea Breeze is going on, and while it's provocative with Russia, this is massive 32 country strong naval games that are going on in the Black Sea. The U.S. and Ukraine particularly involved. This is the site where just weeks ago we had the HMS Defender, a British ship, sail in Russian territorial waters and elicit very strong support from Russia. And here we are with NATO countries, including Ukraine, South Korea, Japan, and Australia, carrying out these very provocative war games. If anybody could look at a map here, they're pretty clearly something that is not at all the business of America. Should be the Black Sea. It's separated from the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea by Turkey, and so it's like a very large lake in Eastern Europe that has shared borders: Georgia, Romania, Bulgaria, and absolutely nowhere near anywhere the U.S. should be, and yet we're leading these massive war games. And our leaders tell us they're essential, and we just believe them, even though it's costing us a lot of money. We're also planning military drills with Poland and Lithuania and Ukraine at the end of July. It'll be the last 2 weeks of July. It's going to involve 1,200 troops and 200 vehicles. They're calling it Three Swords 2021. Again, going to take a couple of weeks, and of course is going to be provocative, taking place in Ukraine. Russia has alleged in the past that the United States uses these war games to smuggle weapons to Ukrainian forces. Looking now at Afghanistan, and I want to update what's been happening there the past couple of days before I go ahead and get into Biden's speech. And so just a couple days ago, we had CENTCOM announce that Central Command that the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was 90% complete. And then a day later from Politico, we had a story from U.S. officials saying that the withdrawal is, for all intents and purposes, it's done. Not sure exactly what that means, how many troops are out of the country. One official said, although we haven't gotten any official numbers, but an unnamed official, anonymous official, did tell us that there were 600 remaining troops in Afghanistan, and those were Army or Marine personnel stationed at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul or at the airport in Kabul. So that's what we have from unnamed sources going on. We also got reports in recent days that fighting in northern Afghanistan led 1,000 Afghan civilians to seek refugee status, and it was granted in Tajikistan. All right, so let's get into Biden's speech now, because this is where we have our big announcement and big news on Afghanistan for the day. I actually held off recording the show till after he went ahead and gave his speech, so I was able to break this down. It's about what I expected in his speech, to be honest. He says the mission will end in August 31st, and so that means it won't continue until September. He initially said September 11th as the potential final date of the war, and now he's saying at least effectively August 31st. Now, there's a lot going on here, and so I want to take his speech in kind of two different blots, the first being policy and then the second being rhetoric. So what came out of this speech, I think, policy-wise, it isn't really anything that we haven't discussed on the last episode of the show, where I was breaking down the U.S. left the Bagram Air Base, and now its military presence in Afghanistan was the Kabul Embassy and the Kabul Airport. And so it doesn't seem like anything's really changing from that. There's a lot of questions that unfortunately the reporters didn't ask, like, does this mean the military post in the embassy will shut down on August 31st. Does this mean no more airstrikes in Afghanistan against against what targets? Are we going to target the Taliban? Are we going to target Al Qaeda? Are we going to target ISIS? Who are we going to target in Afghanistan and why? What are the conditions? None of those questions were asked, and so at this point, we don't know. Again, so let's say we have 600 troops at the embassy today. The mission is going to be complete on August 31st. How many troops do we leave in the embassy at the start of September? That number is unclear. Biden didn't give an answer, but in fairness, the reporters didn't ask or seem to have any interest in asking that question, which is really unfortunate. So yeah, that was like kind of the big questions that we have. Is I don't think anything policy wise, as far as I'm concerned, changed with this speech. But he did announce that that was the date for the mission end. I'm glad he's not doing it on September 11th. That would create a whole bunch of problems. And again, just because he's saying this is the case now doesn't mean it's going to be the case come August 31st. If anybody listened to the question answer period, the reporters were very much on, oh my God, the Taliban are coming, what are you going to do, Joe? So I think that's the direction he's going to get pressure from, not to follow through with the withdrawal, but rather to keep some U.S. troops there. So he said that the point of the mission in Afghanistan was to get the terrorists, and the U.S. Completed that mission, and that we're going to keep an over the horizon capability. This is a phrase being used as like what the U.S. did in Somalia after the U.S. made the Pentagon withdraw from that country. They just positioned troops in the region, and they now fly the troops in and out there. The general joked that the U.S. troops were commuting to work, and so it could be the case that that's what we're looking at in Afghanistan. It also may mean that Biden's just saying that, look, hey, we got some drones here, we could launch them, we could fly them over Afghanistan if we really felt like there was going to be an attack imminent in the United States coming from Afghanistan, and really taking a non-interventionist look as to how he will use force in the future. I'm not convinced that that's who Joe Biden is, and that's what we're going to end up seeing here. He says that his Secretary of State and envoy to Afghanistan, that would be Blinken and Zalmay Khalilzad, will continue to work and make a deal, and is calling for the people of Afghanistan to get together and work out some kind of deal. He's going to continue to work for the release of American hostages in Afghanistan, continue to fund and supply the Afghan Air Force, and ensure the Afghan Air Force is maintained. These are real ways that the U.S. would be continuing a war. If we're, keeping the Afghan, specifically their Air Force capability, which is their real advantage over the Taliban, if we're maintaining that, we're still involving ourselves in this war fairly heavily. And Biden notes this. It's, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars every year. He also says the U.S. is going to maintain humanitarian and civilian aid. He talks about working to get Afghans who assisted the Americans out of the country. He says 2.5 about Afghans have gotten their visas approved to come to the U.S. so far, with about half of them actually deciding and making the trip to the U.S. Biden's narrative is that there's some people who are getting the visas and then deciding not to come, or have decided not to come yet. I don't know if this is true or why, those people, maybe it's like a COVID thing. There could be a host of issues that are keeping people from leaving Afghanistan and coming to the U.S. But that's what Biden had pointed out. Biden did say that the process wasn't fast enough, and he blamed U.S. law as a reason. Although this seems like quite a stretch to me. The Pentagon knew that this was going to happen for years and years. What's going to happen to our interpreters is a question that they ask every single time anybody has brought up the idea of withdrawal. So I think it's pretty ridiculous that they're now saying here like, oh my God, we have to, like, we're scrambling to get people out of the country. But even from Biden's situation, he took office 6 months ago, and he's now kind of trying to claim that, it's U.S. law and we're doing everything we can. You could have done a lot more. You saw this deadline coming. The U.S. should have been doing a lot more about this all along, and I don't think we should just leave these people there. Now, look, if the option A is we either stay with 10,000 troops, or option B is, we leave them all to die, then sorry to the people of Afghan, we can't continue this war, because eventually that will be the issue. We can't keep our troops in Afghanistan to defend the interpreters that worked with us, because more and more interpreters, more and more people work with the U.S. We're just exacerbating the problem. However, there are better ways to do this. Now, it seems like the current plan is, rather than to bring people to the U.S., get their visas approved, they're going to bring anybody who wants to a third country. They don't know where yet. Bring them to a third country and leave them there for their visas to be processed. This seems like a potential absolute train wreck catastrophe to me. You could end up just sticking people in a refugee camp in some random third country where they really don't have rights. There's probably going to be some resentment towards them in those places. It's going to, at least in idea, be a temporary location, and so I think it creates a whole bunch of problems. I really don't like that idea, but again, it probably better than leaving them in Afghanistan, where there may be reprisals directed their way by the Taliban. There have been some reports, Human Rights Watch said in the past couple of weeks, that there have been some reprisals by the Taliban against people who worked with the U.S. Let's see. Biden also says that the U.S. needs to focus on other issues. He specifically mentioned China, implied Russia, talked about cyber threats, will probably also be a lot of Russia. He said COVID and future pandemics and climate change are things that the U.S. needs to focus on. And the U.S., when he was asked, under what conditions would the U.S. re-enter, he kind of says to protect the U.S. or our allies, the U.S. would re-enter. Not exactly sure, clarifying on what that means. And so policy-wise, I don't think we got anything unexpected out of this speech by Biden. I'm not particularly encouraged that the war is going to be any less ongoing than what I anticipated over the past couple of weeks. I am surprised they closed the Bagram Air Base and the Kandahar airfield. It does seem like, at least when we talk about the rhetoric here, Biden really does want to end this war. So let's look at the rhetoric, because here's the place where, if people watched it, they may say, oh, Biden didn't sound that bad. When he was given the reason that we can't stay for just another year or stay indefinitely, he brings up good points, that the only reason Americans aren't dying in Afghanistan right now is because we have a deal to leave. And if we break that deal, Americans are going to start dying. And he doesn't want, to be the president that sends young men and women to die in Afghanistan. He made points about the generational warfare and stuff like that. Pretty decent arguments, actually. He also says that, we can't do like another 6 months or year, because that's what we heard in 2011, and look, here we are a decade later. So Biden made some good points here. His canned speech was, he gave it with a lot of gusto and vigor, and seemed, to be doing pretty well for Mr. Biden. Let's see. He, says that the words about getting terrorists and not about nation building really hammered home on that, that the U.S. mission there was over, and that while it was sad that the situation in Afghanistan wasn't better, that there was reason for the women of Afghan to be concerned if the U.S. leaves, that the situation there for them could be worse, that the U.S. couldn't do anything about it, and that at this point our situation told us to leave. So I honestly think that this is a lot of the rhetoric that's able to enter and that the American people are able to hear, because of the arguments that the Trump administration spent the past 4 years making. Like I said, he says a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of stuff I would agree with. If I were giving a speech on the end of the Afghan war, some of this stuff I probably would have said. Now, he doesn't say a lot of other things, and I think he has some things wrong. During the question and answer period, another thing that he does get right is he says this isn't a mission accomplished moment. And so, he's not treating this like a victory. The tone of the speech wasn't as this is a victory. And so I thought that was kind of a good, statement that he made. Now, I think where his rhetoric is pretty poor is where you look at, he's saying that we gave Afghanistan, they had the future in their hands, that they could unite this country. One reporter asked if it would be the U.S. responsibility if bad things happened after we left. Biden says no, no, no. In a way, we do have to acknowledge that we've created a real mess in Afghanistan with all the weapons we poured into there, all the corrupt figures that we propped up, all the terrible things that our allies have done, and how much more powerful they are in Afghanistan. The fact that civil war didn't conclude at some point, in the past is probably because of the American presence there. So we do bear some responsibility. But the idea that we bear responsibility in the way we have to try to prevent all these bad things from happening. And so while Biden could have made better arguments there, at least he didn't go the wrong way. And then how much he brags about we gave the Afghan army, and we built this great army for them, and they can resist the Taliban. That's really not true, Joe. Sorry about that. It's in part because the U.S. failed in its mission, too much corruption, worked with bad partners, has made some really bad bargains and deals when it's come to Afghanistan. And so, that's a reason for a lot of the U.S. failure. And I think he's going to try to play it off and pretend like it's the failure of the Afghan government to not stick together. I disagree with that, but at the same time, these are probably the safer and easier arguments, and the arguments to make that the American people are primed to hear. And so that's kind of why I thought this speech is about what I expected. It could have been a hell of a lot better, but it wasn't worse. And as far as it goes, the August 31st date, we'll see when it comes what it actually means for ending that war. All right, so now I want to break down some things going on in Iraq and Syria over the past couple of weeks before we wrap up. The U.S. bombed Iraq. I believe it was either on the night of the June 27th or the morning of June 28th. But either way, that very day, there was an attack against U.S. forces in northeastern Syria, I think around the Al-Amar oil fields. No casualties were reported, but the U.S. did come under attack. And then we had on July 4th, the U.S. blaming the attacks of the Iraqi, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria on Iran. I think this is a real stretch to just call all these groups. And all these articles that I have here today talking about this, I'm just going to get into it real quick. These are not just Iranian-backed groups. They don't act at behest of Iran. That's what the U.S. mainstream media propaganda wants you to believe, that all these Shia militias act at the behest of Iran. Now, is it completely wrong to say that they receive some backing or support from Iran? That's probably not wrong. They probably have and do receive some support payments from the Iran or the IRGC. Now, at one point, Iran was backing these groups, and they were fighting along the United States, receiving U.S. air support against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or at least in Iraq and Syria they weren't receiving U.S. air support, but in Iraq they were. And so you could say that they were backed by the U.S. I think mostly they're concerned about the Shia, their kind of branch of Islam, and that's probably their main motivating factor, as well as Iraqi and Syrian nationalism. That's a motivating and driving factor for these people. And so after the U.S. made this statement that Iran denies it at the UN, the next day we had 3 rockets, this is on July 5th, hit the Aden al-Assad Air Base that is in Iraq. U.S. forces are stationed there. They reported no casualties from that attack. And then there was a drone attack on that was shot down, but drones were directed at the U.S. Embassy, the Green Zone in Baghdad. The U.S. in Baghdad, like in Kabul, has missile systems and interceptor systems at their embassies. And so it's important to note that these things just aren't buildings like you see in New York or Washington, D.C. These things are fortified compounds that definitely reflect a military base more than a diplomatic facility. But anyways, there's drones fired then. Now I think we're on to July 6th, when we had an Iraqi commander of one of these Shia militias vow to avenge the deaths caused by the U.S. airstrikes. And on the 6th, we saw a drone strike near the U.S. base in Erbil. It's, I guess, right near the Erbil airport. The U.S. maintained some troops and the rockets hit near there. They say maybe one drone impacted near Erbil. We weren't very clear on what these attacks were, but the attacks did happen and were directed at the U.S. forces. Now, all these attacks are blamed on the Shia militias. It's likely that some, if not all, these attacks are carried out by the Shia militias, but they're not claiming individual responsibility for these attacks. And there are other militants and actors in Iraq that I think would see benefit by exacerbating the conflict between the U.S. and the Shia militias, like Islamic State. They've carried out attacks against like an Iraqi generator or electric facility in the past couple of weeks. So they do have the ability to carry out rocket attacks in Iraq and Syria. And then the next case was on July 7th, where 14 rockets hit the Al-Assad air base in Syria. 2 Americans were injured in the attack, one with a concussion, one with a minor cuts. These don't seem to be serious injuries, but nonetheless, Americans were injured, and this is a clear, escalation when compared to the U.S. I guess the last attack on the Al-Adin air base that would have been a few days before, when 3 rockets hit it. We also had more rockets or drones fired at the green zone in Iraq. The 2 were fired this time. One was intercepted and one landed near the border of the U.S. Embassy. And then the U.S. also reported foiling a drone attack that was going to be launched at where U.S. forces are stationed near the Al-Amar airfield in Syria. And so it's really important to look here and remember that one of the reasons Biden says he carried out the airstrike in Iraq and Syria at the end of June there, June 27th, I believe, was to deter these kind of attacks on American forces, because there have been 5 of these attacks since April. Well, if you look in just the past 10 days, there's been well over 5, maybe 6 or 7, depending on how many of these were, again, attacks by the Shia militias. And it just goes to show that, Biden's plan to blow up these Shia militias is actually blowing up in the faces of our American soldiers. All right, that's all I have for today's show, everyone. It's a hot day here. I can't have the AC on while I record, so I'm going to wrap up there. Me and Will have a few more important stories to talk about next week. What's going on with the Iran nuclear deal, Israel, Julian Assange, this ongoing thing with Tucker Carlson, where the NSA could possibly be unmasking him and leaking to other media sources in an effort to discredit him. I have so much important stuff going on in the world. I can't wait to talk about the rest of it, but we will have to wait till next week. Make sure you subscribe to this show so you don't miss an episode. You could do that at YouTube or Odysee for the video version. It should be up everywhere people listen to podcasts. It's also on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed. You could donate to the show at Patreon or Subscribestar. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, so libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a complete archive of my work. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in. I'll be back with more shows next week.